methodologies that must indeed be closely connected for exploring the visual manifestations of the ancient deities, art history, and ancient Near Eastern knowledge.
All right, let me see if I can work this technology. What do I have to do here? Okay. Can we actually get these lights back down so you can see the images, please? Or do I do control that? Ah, thank you so much. Thank you all, and it's really a delight to be here. I'm so glad I could make it, and I'm really enjoying it so far. Is this better? Yes. Okay. All right. So, and I hope, well, I'll figure it out as we go along. So before I turn to the question of Phoenician ivories, I want to begin by reviewing some basic tenets that we're all probably aware of, though they may not always be foremost in our minds. First, archaeology is principally concerned with the reconstruction of the human past through the recovery of physical traces left behind by humans. Thus, we deduce information about past societies according to the physical remains that they left behind. How we do this, the interpretive leap from material remains to human beings, is the crux of the problem, as I think we're all aware. Let me shift now to some general understandings regarding social groups. First, social groups coalesce through shared experiences. These might be stories passed down through generations, ways of preparing food, rites marking life stages, funerary practices, or social norms. These shared experiences are often, but not necessarily, reinforced by familial and kinship relationships. Yet at the same time, social groups are rarely homogeneous or monolithic, nor are they static and unchanging. Individuals enter and leave social groups or move between multiple overlapping social groups. People change over the course of their lifetimes with respect to age, status, and life experiences. All these variables make the determination of social group identity, according to archaeological remains, extremely challenging. You will note, thus far, I haven't mentioned written evidence. Certainly, texts provide important additional evidence for reconstructing past social groups. Yet, as is now generally acknowledged, they present their own complications and cannot be accepted at face value. Quite simply, language in itself does not equal identity, although it may be one component. For one, individuals may use multiple languages that imbricate with their identity in differing ways. For another, written text may not reflect spoken language, and there are numerous instances one can think of in which a language is used only for display purposes or as a shared lingua franca. At the same time, textual content may make reference to aspects that seem to relate to social identity, but which also need to be closely interrogated for ulterior motives. People don't necessarily provide accurate information about themselves or others in written documents. Over the last 150 years or so of archaeological research, the discipline has developed approaches to recovering ancient group identities that are continuing to evolve in order to address the concerns just cited. These ongoing modifications of disciplinary approaches can produce anomalies when newer approaches run counter to older ones. But the older approaches continue to be used because paradoxically, they serve as the foundation on which the later approaches have been built. Now let's see if that. Such a complicated evolution can be traced in the case of using material culture to define group identities, which rests upon the foundation of the well-known culture history approach developed at the end of the 19th and the beginning of the 20th centuries. Archaeologists such as V. Gordon Childe proposed that archaeological cultures could be defined through assemblages of, in his words, certain types of remains, pots, implements, ornaments, burial rites, house forms, constantly recurring together. Building upon earlier work by problematic scholars such as Gustav Cosina, who, in Child's words, argued that, quote, sharply defined archaeological culture provinces coincide at all times with quite definite peoples or tribes. Despite recent critiques of the culture history approach and the rise of postmodernist understandings of the fluidity and heterogeneity of cultures, both modern and ancient, our need, and perhaps also our desire, to fit archaeological evidence into spatio-temporal containers, and our equation of these containers with social groups remain foundational for most archaeological research. Thus, even if we nuance our notion of culture in order to account for the deconstructions proposed by postmodernist theory, we remain highly dependent on assemblages of material culture as a means for identifying past social collectives in the archaeological record. I would contend, however, that it is for us to prioritize which aspects of the archaeological record are better suited for this task than others. And I would suggest that so-called aesthetic or artistic works offer some of the most difficult bodies of evidence, despite a common tendency to ascribe greater weight to them. This is due to the slippery concept of artistic style and its relationship to identity. In my opinion, the central problem with using artistic works to access ancient identities lies in assumptions made about style and identity. In the late 19th and early 20th century, an understanding of style as a reflection of identity, and especially ethnic identity, became dominant, derived from continental European philosophers such as Kant, Hegel, and Riegel, to name some of the most important. Style, ineffable and epiphenomenal, was understood to manifest an almost psychological character. As the most influential scholar of artistic style, Meyer Shapiro, wrote in the 1950s, style is, above all, a system of forms with a quality and a meaningful expression through which the personality of the artist and the broad outlook of a group are visible. Here, it is important to recall that scholarship on style occurred within the same intellectual milieu as the pseudosciences of physiognomy and phrenology, which viewed outward appearances of human beings as a map of essentialized, internalized identities, often characterized racially. A connection between appearance and identity was taken as self-evident and straightforward. Moreover, this was a time in which European and North American scholars viewed the world through the prism of nationalism, a project of constructing national borders within which homogeneously defined ethnic groups could be discerned. Thus, by the mid-20th century, there was a tightly bundled assemblage of style, identity, ethnicity, and nationality that intertwined in such a way that a single artwork could stand in for an entire monolithically defined social group, providing what has been referred to as a psychological personality. It is against this backdrop that the idea of Phoenicia and Phoenicians began to take shape in the scholarly world, as we heard earlier from Fabio. From early on in the mid to late 19th century, two classes of ancient art objects came to be especially associated with the Phoenicians: carved ivories and decorated metal bowls. And these artworks often act as stand-ins for a psychological profile of an assumed Phoenician identity. I have discussed the metal bowls at length elsewhere. Here today, I focus on the ivories, although much the same could be said for the decorated bowls. And I argue that neither group of objects can provide privileged insights into an exclusively Phoenician identity. I am not going to pronounce on whether such a singular Phoenician identity ever existed. That is, at heart, what this conference is about. However, I want to reiterate the conclusion I reached in my 2019 contribution to Carolina Lopez Ruiz and Brian Dohak's Oxford Handbook of the Phoenician and Punic Mediterranean. Namely, that whatever the evidence we have for assembling a Phoenician identity in the early part of the first millennium BCE, and I want to stress that I'm talking about the first half of the first millennium BCE, we cannot use the ivories for this purpose. I want to stress here that I'm referring specifically to the 9th through 7th centuries. The picture changes dramatically after the 7th century, not least because this marks the end of large-scale ivory carving in the Levant. A principal problem in associating carved ivories with Phoenicians is that there are practically no ivories from any of the Phoenician homeland sites along the eastern Mediterranean coast. This may be due to the relative lack of excavations at places like Tyre, Sidon, and Beirut, but this absence has led to convoluted explanations that often appear unlikely. Among the very few ivories cited as coming from the Phoenician homeland are two from Byblos, which, however, are less often illustrated. In fact, these ivories, which you see here on the screen, most likely date to the Late Bronze Age, and neither exhibits features that are typically considered to be Phoenician, that is, notably Egyptianizing elements. 3 fragmentary ivory plaques, which remain unpublished, but I understand will be published soon from Ayelet, have been excavated recently at Tel Dor. They depict kneeling and charging bulls in poses not dissimilar to the Byblos bull and griffin plaque, although in quite a different style of execution. And they too lack clearly Egyptianizing elements. That didn't do what I wanted it to do. Something else is supposed to, let me see. Just see if I can get this to work. No. Yeah, no, well, that's okay. I was trying to be clever and I was going to have another image appear. But for whatever reason, this PowerPoint isn't allowing it to appear. So, yeah. So, at any rate, what was going to appear was a fragmentary female head wearing an Egyptianizing wig that comes from Sarepta, which is the only ivory from a Phoenician homeland site that would be classified as Phoenician according to current stylistic descriptions. You'll just have to take my word for that. All right. The vast majority of ivories attributed to Phoenician crafting come from the Assyrian capital at Nimrud, where ivories of diverse styles, forms, and imagery commingle as part of the enormous tribute and booty collected by the empire. Other examples, often attributed to Phoenician production, appear at sites in Israel and Judah, most notably those from Samaria, as well as in the northern Levantine sites like Zinjerli and Arslan Tash. Thus, the identification of Phoenician ivories rests almost entirely on stylistic traits derived from material found outside the homeland. The central aspect of these traits was early on identified as their highly Egyptianizing character. This association of Egyptianizing style with Phoenician identity stems primarily from Byblos and its close relations with Egypt in the 3rd and 2nd millennia BCE, evident both in materials found at the site of Byblos and from the Egyptian tale of Wen Amun. Yet it is noteworthy that no Iron Age ivories have been recovered from the site, and that the Late Bronze Age ivories found there, just mentioned a moment ago, and that you just saw, do not display this characterization of Egyptianizing features. In addition, Egyptianizing art trends are found distributed more broadly throughout the Levant than just the Phoenician cities. To account for this wide distribution, scholars have engaged in circular arguments in order to make the case for Phoenician manufacture. For example, 9th and 8th century Egyptianizing ivories found at Samaria, the capital of Israel from the 9th century to its conquest by Assyria in 701 BCE, have been attributed to the Phoenicians through the biblically attested marriage of Ahab to the Phoenician princess Jezebel. However, the Phoenician attribution of these ivories has recently been challenged by, for example, scholars such as Liat Naher, because of the growing number of carved ivories known from early Israelite settlements, and the inclusion of unworked ivory pieces among the Samaria assemblage that suggests local production, at least of some of them, not to mention the reference in the Hebrew Bible to Solomon's crafting of a great throne of ivory. And I note here that in that passage, there's no mention of Phoenicians being part of that crafting of that ivory throne. The presence of ivories with Egyptianizing elements found in the northern Levant, for example, at the site of Zingerli, Samal, has likewise been explained as Phoenician imports. I, along with scholars such as Claudia Suter, have suggested that the long-standing stylistic division between Phoenician and North Syrian ivory styles, based on the frequency and intensity of Egyptianizing elements, and traditionally ascribed to two different geocultural regions, might speak rather to a chronological development from more North Syrian style, in quotation marks, ivories in the earlier part of the first millennium to more Egyptianizing Phoenician style ivories in the late 8th and 7th centuries BCE. In addition to an absence of ivories from the Phoenician homeland, there are only a small number of ivories found in Phoenician colonies. Only very few lower quality ivories have been found at Carthage, far fewer than have been found at non-Phoenician sites around the Mediterranean. Ivories from Iberia, which date later than most of the Levantine ivories, that is to the 7th and 6th centuries BCE, display a strong local flavor that clearly distinguishes them from the purportedly original Phoenician ivories. Certainly, colonial establishments over time diverge from and develop independently of their homelands. And we just heard a wonderful example of that with Alex and Nama's paper. Raising questions of identity in general. Does a 6th century Iberian Phoenician colonist share the same identity as a 9th century Phoenician from the Levantine coast? If we are to use artistic style to equate with identity, which already is a shaky proposition, then the identity of those who produced and or consumed the ivories found on the Iberian Peninsula was substantially different from those who produced the ivories traditionally identified as Phoenician. As post-colonial studies have demonstrated, it is impossible to imagine a colonizing group not being impacted by their experiences in a new locale and their interactions with new groups of people, thereby reshaping their own identities. Language, as already noted, is often taken as a central component of identity, and the Phoenician language holds an especially important place in the early first millennium. However, precisely because of the centrality of the language during this period, its occurrence does not necessarily point to ethnic identity. Because the Phoenician language served as a lingua franca of the greater Levantine region from at least the 9th century through the 7th century BCE, when Aramaic slowly superseded it, its presence on objects, such as two highly Egyptianizing vessels found in Italy, which have been attributed to Phoenician manufacture, cannot point to actual Phoenician manufacture. Moreover, there are numerous examples of Phoenician inscriptions, some bilingual, used for monumental display purposes in the northern Levant and southeastern Anatolia, such as the 8th century monumental gateway at Karatepe in Cilicia that you see here. In addition, the Phoenician alphabet was widely used during the early centuries of the Iron Age to write a variety of other Northwest Semitic languages, sometimes even causing confusion regarding which language was being written in which alphabet. While there appears to be a hardening of ethno-linguistic identities over the course of the 8th and 7th centuries BCE, suggesting a closer association between language and ethnic identity in the following centuries, the by then extensive and long-standing dispersal of Phoenician-speaking populations cautions us against equating the use of the language as part of a single There is no doubt that exceptionally skilled crafters, most likely including ivory carvers, practice Sidon, as we hear about in the Hebrew Bible and the Homeric epics. Yet using the art historical tools of stylistic and formal analysis, we are unable to differentiate artwork produced in Phoenician cities from those produced in neighboring areas of the Levant, or even more far-flung locales. As I've argued in my 2014 book, Communities of Style, in part, this is because the Levantine city-states of the earlier part of the Iron Age interacted with one another as part of a networked whole, rather than as ethno-linguistically defined separate entities. Especially in the early centuries of the first millennium BCE, the Phoenician language served as a lingua franca for written displays during a time when the other languages of the region were only just starting to be written down. It appears in contexts around the Eastern Mediterranean, far exceeding the boundaries of the Phoenician homeland. Likewise, carved ivories, which we are fortunate to have surviving in the thousands from places like Nimrud in Assyria, where they were brought as tribute and booty, display a spectrum of stylistic, formal, and motival features that defy sharply delineated boundaries. Returning to the foundational tenet of culture history, that, quote, sharply defined archaeological culture provinces coincide with quite definite peoples or tribes, this blurring of the material culture boundaries renders null Shapiro's later assertion that, quote, style is, above all, a system through which the broad outlook of a group is visible. If we want to access a distinctly Phoenician identity for the early first millennium, we must, I contend, do so in the absence of carved ivories. There are, in fact, no such thing as Phoenician ivories. To return to my point from the beginning of this talk, archaeology seeks to recover the human past. If, therefore, we assign material culture incorrectly to particular social groups, we will generate a false understanding of that past. I do not suggest that we cannot access the Phoenicians as a social group, or as I would prefer to call them, the inhabitants of the specific cities later associated with the Phoenicians, most notably Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Beirut, and Arvad. But we must do so through the careful analysis of assemblages of material culture that can be securely linked to these locales, especially pottery, architecture, and various lifeway practices. Aspects of daily life in particular can speak to shared daily practices that serve to bring together and define group identity. Unfortunately, the expertly crafted and sumptuously carved ivories typically associated with the Phoenicians cannot play much role in this endeavor. Indeed, these must be divorced from the boundaries of a strictly Phoenician identity and permitted to belong to a much larger, more fluid network of crafting traditions across the greater Levant and beyond. Thank you.
How would you view the mechanism of transfer, technological or artistic, between such far-flung areas and over a period of time, if at all?
Yeah, it's complicated. I think there were multiple means of transfer. I think what I have seen, at least in my personal work, is that within what I call sort of the greater Levant, which is sort of southern Levant up into northern, going a little bit to the east and a little bit up into southeastern Anatolia, I see a lot of mobility and movement and interaction, which is what I'm thinking of as a sort of networked entity. From there, I think things are moving by trade, by military activity, so the Assyrians with their booty and tribute, and peoples, I think, are moving around. So I think there's a lot of different things going on. But within the Levant itself, I think they're all part of this sort of what community practice that we've been talking about, that they're, because these I think the artists and the political entities in the early first millennium are all interacting with one another in a very close-knit way and exchanging with one another.
Was the May I ask another question? The source of the raw material, also something that was shared or?
Yeah, the source of the raw material is a great question, right? Because that early tradition of ivory working that developed in the Bronze Age, there seemed to be, indigenous elephant populations at least in the Syrian area. So they have this tradition that grows up there. By the first millennium, right, they're extinct somewhere by the 9th century, they're extinct. And that ivory is coming from Africa. And so they're tapping into these very extensive networks that are coming up the eastern coast of Africa. And that's a really interesting question. Yeah.
So can I continue this conversation? Actually, it's better without, so we can see the motifs. And sorry, I'm losing my voice, talking too much as usual. But just to continue this line of, first of all, thank you. Excellent paper as always. But so as you said, by the first millennium, at least if it's elephant ivory.
And it mostly is elephant ivory.
Thank you. And I think there are people in the audience who've actually done material science testing on, their ivory, so they can add to this conversation.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't have been coming up the east coast of Africa. It would have been coming up the Nile.
Unclear.
Actually, well, anyway. So
Unclear. Actually, I'm
yeah, from okay, but
it could definitely come up the Nile, but it could also come up
well,
anyway.
From a maritime perspective, it would have been going up the Nile. Regardless, in the Western Mediterranean, a little bit later, there's a shipwreck that has ivory tusks.
Yes, I know
with
the one.
Phoenician.
I know the one you mean.
inscriptions.
Yep.
So that, in essence, either those were being traded as an object, as dedications.
Well, it's very interesting because they have dedicatory inscriptions on them.
Yeah, exactly. But presumably there were ones that were uninscribed from other ships
Mhm.
that were going to workshops,
Mhm.
right? I mean, if you follow the chaîne operatoire, thank you, that's a concept that's already come up. And it's it's not just the raw goods that are moving as well. The motifs, maybe the style
Mhm.
cannot be defined,
Mhm.
but these motifs also have at least late Bronze Age predecessors
Sure.
here in the southern Levant.
Yeah.
The Hon.
Yeah.
I mean, again, we have
And I guess I'm just curious where you're going with that, because certainly this material is moving around. There's no
Yeah.
question. My argument here is that we can't just say it's Phoenicians. It's more people. There are more people involved.
sure.
And so so we can't
remembering
just
if Ron Tappy were in the audience, I think there were blanks of ivory blanks or bone blanks found at Samaria.
Yeah.
In the Iron too, right? So
right.
And so
exactly.
that's
Which I
and
mentioned.
I think newer
Yeah.
ones from Jerusalem. So that suggests a workshop.
Absolutely.
If you have wasters
Right,
and
right,
discards.
right. Yep.
But what I'm suggesting here is that these motifs are indigenous to the Levant.
Yeah.
So if the motifs
I don't disagree with you there.
and the ivories are moving to Assyria, what I'm suggesting is that the workshop is not in Assyria.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I would absolutely agree.
Yeah.
I think it's the Levant, but it's this greater Levant. I don't think we can say it's just Phoenicia. That's what I'm
thinking
saying.
of Phoenician writ large, because those.
I guess I would prefer it the other way around.
Okay.
The Levant writ large.
Levant, okay. Well, then those. Okay, but in Spain, I don't know who. Oh, I'm restricted to the.
No. But I think I think we're saying the same thing. It's just I prefer not to use the term Phoenician because I think
Right.
trans
It's all rhetoric.
it
That's what the point.
trans because if they're at Samaria, then they're not Phoenician.
Yeah, just thank you so much. Really good. I couldn't help but think of the Astarte ivory from Nimrud that has Luash inscribed on the back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just, to me, a perfect example that supports exactly what you're advocating. So it came to my mind and thought I would mention.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Northern part of.
Right, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, should we hear Ayala and then, yeah.
Just a comment regarding the source of the ivory, which was asked here. Harel Shocha just concluded a PhD and a very extensive paper in JUST showing that he sampled the largest sample ever of ivories, only from the southern Levant, and he showed that at least in the sample, almost everything was elephant from the chronological ranges from the late Bronze Age to the end of the Iron Age. Almost everything is elephant, and all the elephants are African from far away in Africa. So probably I would guess up the Nile, but this is not. I mean, the main conclusion is that material for ivories that reached the Levant is African from the very beginning, and he was on everything.
Thank you. I wanted to ask, so if we exclude the Phoenicians as the craftsmanship, as those who produced the ivories, can we still talk about them as the agents?
Agents as in how they move around?
Yes.
I don't have a firm answer to that. I would, my inclination, and especially from what I've heard from other talks today, is that there are a lot of different groups of people that are moving around the Mediterranean in the first millennium. And so I think for us to collapse everybody down into Phoenicians might be somewhat sort of, well, yeah, I mean, sort of white, we're reducing things a little bit, oversimplifying it. So I think certainly there's no question that there were people from Tyre and there were people from Sidon, and they were out there and they were major movers of things that were going on. But I think there were other people out there, and we've heard about the Etruscans. I think were doing a lot of movement too. They weren't just sitting in Italy waiting for things to come to them. I think they were moving around. So I do think that it's very, very difficult, I think, to pinpoint specifically peoples. But I say this as an art historian, not as an archaeologist, so maybe I'm giving more credit to archaeologists than I should. But for me, I think pottery is probably your best chance at identifying people. And I don't do pottery, so I don't have to pronounce on that.
You hinted in your lecture for the possibility that those ivories that were defined, I believe you refer to Irene Winter's articles on inner Syria as against Phoenician, that maybe they should represent different dates. That means that the inner Syrians, perhaps, so-called, are earlier, you meant? And
The North Syrian. The North Syrian. So the ones that are considered to have fewer Egyptianizing.
Is there any proof of that? Yeah.
Megiddo is an entirely different. Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, this is an idea that I've sort of bandied around, and my colleague Claudia Suter has also bandied around. She's worked on the Samaria ivories quite a bit. It's always been accepted that the Phoenician ivories are later than the North Syrian ivories. So I guess the new twist on that is that it's not necessarily that these are geographically separate, that they're still chronologically different, but that they don't necessarily have to be also kind of geoculturally separate. That it could be sort of, there probably are some geocultural distinctions that happened from, say, the 9th century through the 7th century, but that it's not going to be a clear-cut, North Syria area versus further south Phoenician. And I think the there's this other group that Irene identified, this intermediate group, or this she called it the South Syrian style, that really problematized that whole notion of these kind of two different cultural groups of ivories.
May I also add a comment? We always spoke about this gap between the late Bronze ivories, the Megiddo treasure and so on, and the later Iron II ivories. But as time passed, we have more ivories from the Iron I, from the 11th century, which fill the gap, like the
Yeah.
McNally or the
Right.
Megiddo box and so on.
Mhm.
So this, I think, emphasizes
Yeah.
the possibility that there was a
I-
local school that continued from the late Bronze
Right,
throughout
Right.
Iron
I think that's absolutely right. The reason I say that Megiddo is a different situation is not the chronological difference, but and this is an idea that I published, I can't remember exactly when, in an article in the journal Levant, that I think the ivories at Megiddo we can't say are Megiddo ivories. I mean, I think this was a collection of ivories that was assembled through opportunistic means at the end of the Bronze Age, as political situations are imploding and as these ivories are becoming available. Because if you look at the Megiddo ivories, they don't create assemblages. You don't have whole pieces of furniture. It's all fragments. It's all a plaque from here and a plaque from there. It really looks opportunistic. Exactly. And so I think it's very different than, say, if you compare Megiddo to, say, the ivories from Ugarit, you get a completely different picture. So that's why I think Megiddo is not, we can't say these are ivories that were produced in Megiddo. That's what I think. Egyptianizing elements, definitely. Oh, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, let me see.
What I have said, sorry.
Is that
What I've said is
Go ahead.
that I mentioned the Megiddo ivory, not because the identity with the Iron Age is because it reflects a tradition of worked ivories in palatial context that we found later in the Second Iron Age. And that, if I may I have a question? Could you please say, in this context, something about the Samaria ivories, please?
Oh, I wish Claudia was here, because she knows so much more about the Samaria ivories. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's some, well, as has already been said, I think some are local, definitely. There's evidence for a local workshop, and some are not local. And discerning which are which and how to, I think we have to be very careful, very, very careful.
Careful thing I said is that I wonder whether the designation, I think, postponed in that generation, defined the Samaria ivories as Phoenician. And that's, I think, is unaccepted anymore.
Yes, I would agree. I would agree. That's,
Okay.
it's not, yeah. Thank you all.
Okay, we have a coffee break.
בוא נמצא את החבר'ה ונפגש. איפה? אפשר? לא, לא נראה.
I just heard from Mariano that he's having some with his would you be happy to potentially? I leave here, it's okay. Alternatively, I can ask her. Okay, so let me share it, you can have a thought, and then we will.
לינה, את תישאר או שנתחיל כבר?
עדיין, מריאנו אמשיך, אבל עדיין,
הוא בזום?
הוא אמור לדבר,
הבנתי. הבנתי. Don't make the census, doesn't the census that we were there, that's like, we gotta leave the census with an alternative. But that has the early. Right? Then you have the background and then decide. It's primary for this take all night. Right, with the past, the office. Yeah. It's a great question. It's a great question. How do you view it? Is the source of that? Be very careful. That's what it's pulled out. Says no, it's separation. And it's Jesus knocks over the money. Right, but you see that the money changers are infinite. And it's part of it, and you hope that you elevate the physical world, spirituality, have a lot of that where money itself comes to it, like so shading, she is its focus. Yeah, I have money that has saying. That's what you said about. And I gotta get rid of it, I gotta pay taxes, I get my etc. But not that it's Cal itself. Then because it says it's Cal itself. And money very fast. It's a nice time. פעם שעבר עוד לא הגענו במצב.
Yes.
Used to be the first, having some difficulties with into his university, so the faculty was updated, but they couldn't change the grade.
It's actually fine, but yes, which I have here. I can advance in using these, but I have to use something else.
You can use that, you can,
Actually,
and there's also things that
oh, okay.
so I think you can do
Mhm.
hours or you can.
And one other minor request, can you put like
Mariano?
Yes, I'm here. But
Mariano, can you speak for a minute so I can hear you? Okay, can't hear you well. I just wanted to let you know that there is delay in 10 minutes or so, okay?
Okay.
Okay, now I hear you. So they
Okay.
will all come
You
back
hear
in
me
something like
because I have had travels with the network of my university, and I couldn't connect through it. So I am using the link with my Yahoo mail, but I'm here.
Okay, so they will start in 5 minutes, okay?
5 minutes. Okay.
Okay. I'll try to
Mariano,
rush
I'm
them.
also making you co-host, so you should be able to share your PowerPoint.
Okay.
If you want to try now, it should work. No, I think they just, if anybody wants it, but so you're more than qualified.
Hola, Mariano.
Hi.
Can you see me?
I'm trying to share the PowerPoint now.
Mariano, it's delete. Look at me at the screen. Can you see me? He can't hear me.
I can hear you, yeah. But
Oh, I see. Okay.
Fantastic, we can see it.
okay, I go to the first one.
Yeah, no, I put someone.
Great, and just to share in presentation mode whenever you're ready and we can see everything.
Okay. Alex? Okay, I'm happy to open the final session for today, Phoenicians and the Sea. The first speaker is Mariano Torres Ortiz from Complutense University of Madrid, and he will speak about earliest Phoenician presence in Iberia through Zoom. Hi, Mariano.
Hi.
You can share. You're sharing. Okay.
Can you see the images? Okay, thank you very much. And first of all, I want to thank the Israel Institute of Advanced Studies for an invitation to take part in this session of in this Congress on the Phoenicians in the Mediterranean. The topic that I wanted to tackle this afternoon was that of the earliest Phoenician presence in Iberia. And the topic has been very discussed from or since the 19th century because we have in the written sources references to the foundation of Cadiz in the late 12th century BC by the Phoenicians, more properly by the Tyrians. As you can see, and you know, Cadiz is placed in the, to the west of the Straits of Gibraltar in the Atlantic, not properly in the Mediterranean, and it is one of the farthest places where Phoenicians found in colonial settlement in the diaspora in the late 9th and the early 8th century BCE. But the chronological framework of the foundation of Cadiz was provided by the Roman writer Pelagius Paterculus, that stated that the Phoenician foundation was established in 1104 or 1103 BCE in a text well known by all of you. But the main problem is that the archaeological evidence doesn't fit so early date provided by the written sources. And the earliest archaeological evidences retrieved in Iberia can be dated from the late 9th or mid 9th century BC onwards. It has been attested in the last years in several sites of southwestern Iberia, and we will see some of them in the next minutes. The first one is on the site of Méndez Núñez, Plaza de las Monjas, in nowadays Huelva. The Tartessian or local settlement in the mouth of the rivers Tinto and Audiel, and very close to one of the richest areas of mining and of metals in Iberia and in all the Atlantic Europe. In this site that in the 9th century was very close to the coast, probably even in the intertidal area of Huelva, An assemblage of mainly of pottery was retrieved in the late 19th by several colleagues that have provided the earliest Phoenician pottery in Iberia, besides another site, in this case in the Mediterranean coast, La Rebanadilla, that we will see in a few moments. Méndez Núñez, Plaza de las Monjas, supposed a change of paradigm in the Phoenician presence in Iberia because the pottery retrieved was earlier than those ones known from other sites, mainly from the Mediterranean coast of Iberia, mainly from the area of Malaga. Some of these potteries you can see in the screen. We have storage jars or transport jars. Some of them may be very early, but mainly the nowadays known as transport jars. One named by Gunnar Lehmann and his colleagues in a well-known paper recently published in Revista di Studi Fenici. In Huelva, we have Near Eastern transport jars, Phoenician jars, related to the storage jar 9 of Tyre. We also have neck-drink jugs related earlier than the typical mushroom-relieved jugs well known in colonial settlements in the Phoenician Mediterranean from the mid-8th century BC onwards, and bowls and dishes that predate the dishes and bowls known from the 60s and 70s of the 1960s and 1970s of the last century. For example, in Huelva, we don't have the typical red slip colonial dishes well known in Malaga, Carthage, and so on. So we have an early horizon of Phoenician presence in Iberia. And apparently in the same layers, the earliest Greek imports in Iberia. Scyphoi, related to Middle Geometric 2, to Attic Middle Geometric 2, pendant semicircle scyphoi, and pendant semicircle plates that can be dated from the late 9th to the early 8th century BC. And that until the Huelva findings had not been attested in Iberia. It is also interesting the C14 samples carried out from these sites with results, calibration ranges that spans from the middle late 11th century BC to the mid-late 9th century BC. Some of them on bone, on ox bone, and some of them on short-lived samples such as grapes, vines, and ordeum. So we have very early C14 dates with very early Phoenician pottery. In terms of the pottery sequence of the Levant, we can place the Huelva Méndez Núñez pottery, as other colleagues have also done, as Francisco Núñez, Alfredo Mederos, and so on, in the very late iron 2A and mainly in iron 2B, at least in the early stages of iron 2B in the Levant. As I have said, the other Phoenician site with very early Phoenician pottery is La Rebanadilla. La Rebanadilla is placed in the nowadays province of Málaga, in the mouth of the river Guadalhorce, very close to the mouth of the river Guadalhorce. And nowadays, the site is under the airport of Málaga. The site has not been excavated fully, and we hope that when airport doesn't work, it will be possible to return to dig in this interesting site. La Rebanadilla has a difference with Huelva, and it is that we have clear evidences of urbanism. In Huelva, we don't have any building of this early stage. In La Rebanadilla, we have some buildings of Phoenician architecture with local and Phoenician pottery. Several of these buildings have been understood as temples, as shrines, because of the presence of incense burners and possible standing stones. But I really think that this identification is at least dubious, and there are other possibilities. Probably we have the earlier Phoenician settlement nowadays in Iberia. In the phases 4 and 3 of this site, we have the same import of Greek pottery, the Phoenician, Near Eastern Phoenician transport jars, and the same bowls and dishes, not still the typical ones of the mid-8th century BCE. As in Huelva, all the amphoras in La Rebanadilla are imported. And here also some C14 dates has been carried out on charcoal and mainly on ivory, on elephant ivory and on hippopotamus ivory. As in Huelva, the calibrated ranges span from the mid-late 8th century BC to the mid-late 9th century BC. Viewing these evidences, I think that we can propose, as other colleagues have also done, as Professor Gilboa, Francisco Núñez, and so on, an early Phoenician presence in Iberia prior to the last quarter of the 9th century BC, probably from mid-9th century BC. And Huelva Méndez Núñez, another excavation in Huelva that I have not showed, Concepción Street, and La Rebanadilla are became become the earlier Phoenicians phase in Iberia. In the late 9th century BC and the early 8th century BC, we have another phase with some differences in the pottery, and the main site of this phase is Teatro Cómico in Cádiz. It is the site with the earliest evidences of Phoenician presence in this city, with another excavations in the area. But the interest of the Teatro Cómico is that we have evidences of urbanism. So we have a city in Gadir, in Cádiz, in the late 9th and the early century BC. I'm afraid I have problems with the animations of the PowerPoint, but you can see the urban layout with a street, a small alley, and several houses with straight walls, stone foundations, and earth elevations, earth walls. In architecture, very usual in Phoenician sites all around the Mediterranean. Other element, the tanur oven, also Phoenician, also Near Eastern, in that it has been attested here in Teatro Cómico and in other sites in the Bay of Cádiz, such as el Castillo de Doña Blanca. We can see the evolution of the next ridge jacks with types between the squatted square jack, neck jacks of the 9th century BC and the mushroom-lipped red-sleeve jacks proper of the mid of the 8th century onwards. We have several examples retrieved in these excavations. And now we have the earliest evidences of the red sleeve colonial dishes, which I have said are very usual in Malaga, in Carthage, Sardinia, and so on. In this phase, we have local production of these red sleeve dishes, and also we have the first evidences of the local production of storage jars. Storage jars that even here in Cádiz were produced in the area of Málaga, in the area of Morro de Mezquitilla, Vélez Málaga, the coast to the east of the nowadays city of Málaga. So in its earliest moments, Gadir is being supplied by colonial settlements, Phoenician colonial settlements in the area of Málaga, such as La Rebanadilla, and then Cerro del Villar, Morro de Mezquitilla, and so on. Indeed, in Morro de Mezquitilla, it has been attested a pottery assemblage very close to this one of the phase 2 of Teatro Cómico that can be dated between the late 9th and the early 8th century BC. although unpublished, some C14 dates has been carried out from these layers, and its chronology fits the archaeological chronology, and they have calibration spans from the late 9th to the early 8th century BC, but they falls mainly in the so-called Hallstatt plateau, with all the problems that we know it has. It is clearly a Phoenician settlement with Phoenician graffiti, clay seals of the Ixos style defined by Manesha Boslos, with these 3 examples, and this one with geometric patterns. And carved ivory of Phoenician production with lotus flowers. So in this moment we have a clear Phoenician presence in the Bay of Cadiz, but much later than the chronology recorded in the written sources. The Phoenician presence in the Bay of Cadiz continues in the second half of the 8th century BC. See, yes?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
Okay, I finish. In a site such as Castillo de Ñablanca, I go fast. You can see here the place of the site. By the former mouth of the Rio Guadalete, Phoenician quarter with streets and architecture, and the pottery is retrieved in this area is slightly later than that one retrieved in Cadiz, with 2 red slip matched from lead jacks that can be dated, as I have said, in the second half of the century BC. The wall of the city is one, and I finish with El Carambolo. El Carambolo is a place very close to the former mouth of the Guadalquivir River, on a hill, and in the late 9th and the early 8th century BC, a building of Near Eastern architecture was made on the top of the hill, and the material culture, the Phoenician pottery retrieved in this building, have provided some Near Eastern amphorae, bowls, oil bottles, and so on, that can be related to the face of so from the very late 9th, early 8th century BC, we have a Phoenician presence in the area of the Guadalquivir River that can be explained by the search mainly of the metals of southwestern Iberia. We are talking about silver, it has been shown by the researches of Zila Eshel and her colleagues, a silver from Western Iberia that arrives to the Levantine coasts from the 9th century BC onwards. And this is the main ideas I wanted to show you. C14 date on charcoal, very early, probably old wood. In fact, these are the ideas that I could show you. So thank you very much for your attention and for your kind invitation for taking part in this congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariano, for joining us through Zoom and sharing your presentation with us. We have time for a few questions. Alex, please.
Thank you, Mariano. This is Alex Vantalkin. I don't know if you can see me.
Hi, Alex.
I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. And as you recall, during the research stay here, we've considered this idea of coming to Spain as a research group and visiting all these Phoenician sites. We are still up to this idea, so maybe in the near future, we will be able to do this, and maybe others will join from the current participants as well. So that was the idea, and it is still in the process of materializing. So maybe sometime in the future. Thank you very much for this presentation.
Okay, I will be pleased to see you in Spain if this idea materializes.
Thank you again.
We have another question from our body.
Thank you very much for a fascinating presentation. So I love seeing the ceramics, and I think there was one example of an ivory, and then all the wonderful C14 data. Is there any other like metal material culture that you could just describe briefly, or animal bones that you could fill us in on? You know, that kind of thing. Other aspects of the material culture from these sites.
Okay, other aspects. In these sites, there are a very important amount of handmade pottery of local populations. In some of them, Cadiz is better known to me. In the phase 2, local handmade pottery amounts up to almost 40%, with even in Huelva and other sites, imitations of the Greek pottery. Handmade local pottery that imitates the decorations of the Greek pottery. In the material culture, there are also other items such as fibulae, tuyers, slack, and so on. So there is really a good amount of material to research.
That's really exciting. I appreciate your sharing it verbally. I would just, to bolster your argument, say that I don't know the Tartessian material, the indigenous material, but the fibulae are definitely Near Eastern, right? Or Levantine. So you get back to Marian's term. So that's another, feather in your cap, as we say in English.
Mm.
In other words, it's part of this package that the earliest Levantine settlers are bringing with them. And from what you described of the local pottery, handmade, etc., they are interacting with the locals, maybe living next to one another. You probably don't have a broad enough exposure because the city sits on top of, the rest of the mound. But I'm quite excited. So thank you.
We have time for last question. Can you use the microphone?
Thank you very much for this presentation. I'm a marine archaeologist, and I would like to ask you if you find any harbor facilities on your sites, Phoenician facilities, meaning like breakwaters or harbors or bays built in the Phoenician style, as we know here in Israel or in Lebanon.
No, quays or such as the athlete quays or ports, built ports, no. The more similar is later in the 7th century BC or the early 6th century BC in Toscanos in Malaga. There is evidences of a possible built quay close to the sea coast.
Okay,
But
thank you.
it would be the only possible evidence of a Phoenician harbor in Iberia. Mainly, we have anchorages.
And evidence of colonization?
Of?
Colonization, the Phoenician colonization in that part of the sites you were digging. The Phoenician colonization.
Yes.
Early settlement, meaning of early settlement, Phoenician settlements.
Phoenician settlements in the area. There are several ones from Cádiz to the mouth of the Segura River in Alicante. Settlements are well known, but also cemeteries and necropolis have been excavated from the 1960s of the last century, mainly by the colleagues of the German Archaeological Institute in Madrid.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
The next lecture will be presented by Liora Bozaglo from the Sorbonne and Tel Aviv University. It is co-authored by Eli Itkin and Alexander Fatalkin from Tel Aviv University. And they will talk about local clay, global influences, Rukesh, where in the network of Phoenician port identities.
First, I would like to thank the conference organizer, sorry, for giving me the opportunity to present our research here today. The title is Local Clay Global Influences, and that question is exactly the point. And I'm going to discuss Fukeshwar as an epiphenomenon, small in scale, highly context-specific, and easy to dismiss as a local oddity. Before I turn to the pottery, a brief word on the evidentiary base. Tel El Rukesh lie roughly about 18 kilometers southwest of ancient Gaza and covers about 25 acres. Works begin with Ori in 1940, then Biran in 1973 with salvage excavation, and then Eliezer Oren in the early 80s with survey and excavation under Ben-Gurion University. I will rely on those preliminary report excavation reports while keeping in mind the usual limits, uneven publication, mixed context, and recoveries issue. And the material from Oren's excavation was published in detail by my co-author Eli Itkin, PhD, and he is with us in Zoom normally. Ori's excavated 24 jar and Yon Burial, about 500 meters south of the settlement area. Most contain cremated remain, often black and red juglet, burnished juglet. And Biran and Oren also reported additional cremation in the sandy hill next to the southern wall of the excavation area. The evidence suggests roughly 30 iron H2 cremation burial, even perhaps more, alongside primary inhumation and open and primary cremation, and they were practiced contemporaneously. The urns contain adults, children from both sexes. And one caveat mattered here, several graves were very close to the modern ground surface, which likely affected preservation and the recovery of grave goods. Biran's emergency work identified 5 strata from the Iron Age 2 to the Persian period with evidence from Boston and a cemetery as presented. And the settlement was fortified by a massive mud brick wall dated to the second half of the 8th century, which correspond to like phase 4, and then phase 3 and 2 fall into the 7th and 6th century approximately. The principal horizon for what I will discuss is strata 4 and 3 date to the second half of the 8th and 7th century. Here the city walls continue and there is evidence for a hamlet or village about 200 meters south of the tell. 2 items are often cited as chronological marker, an is Greek Milesian sherd and a scarabs attributed to the 26th century. Dynasty, sorry. There is also a possible destruction signal, an ash layer, but I treat this as a working hypothesis rather than the settled conclusion. Most of the settlement ceramics come from a dump area abutting the city wall, which may reflect cleaning activity connected to stratum 4. Oren described the pottery from phase 4-2 as including white-bellied and torpedo storage jar, highly burning jug, and crater that he described as Rukeishware. There is also what we call Phoenician / Samarian bowl, which has Phoenician, and imports from Cyprus and Greece and Egypt. In the cemetery, we also have Phoenician plain and bag from juglet, Phoenician type amphora, black and red juglet, etc. So the site sits in a connected zone, some imports, some recognizably Phoenician shapes, and a set of vessels that were singled out as Rukeishware. In practical terms, this term refers to a heavy red slip, vertical burnishing, sometimes spaced with a black or an horizontal decoration, sometimes not. And at Rukeish, it appeared as a repertoire, and it covers crater, jug, and bowls. So already methodologically, we need to separate 3 things that too often gets collapsed, like the shape, surface treatment, and decoration, and as well as the pace, forming, and firing. So Kulikan placed the cemetery assemblage in the 9th century, whereas Estrin and Diagimendel moved it to the last quarter of the 8th century, and the settlement yet example date, as we say, to the 8th and 7th century. And this Rukeishware does not appear to circulate beyond the site. But here's the gap. There is still no comprehensive typological and archaeometric study of Rukeishware as a ware, if it is one. So Oren framed, based on like the finds, Rukeish as a Phoenician harbor, trading center south of Gaza, operating under imperial auspices, and even proposed link to the Silk Cargo of Egypt. And Lipinski also proposed another construction within Assyrian coastal policy. So whatever makes one make these scenarios, they raise a familiar issue. The ceramics do not map neatly onto political control or ethnic composition, but they may reflect trade, also imitation, adaptation, local demand, selective signaling, etc. The question is not Phoenician or not, and the goal is not to replace one cultural labor with another. It's to make the ware answerable to concrete question, where it was made, how it was made, in which context it was used and discarded, and only after we can discuss mechanism responsibly, trade migration, imitation, potter mobility, local negotiation of external style, etc. again. So the working hypothesis is simple here. Rukeishware is best approached as a local task-specific ceramic solution, and it's to translate Phoenician and wider Mediterranean morphological ID into southern coastal plain mortuary ecosystem, structured by port connectivity and shifting hegemony. So now I move to the formal repertoire across all excavated contexts, and I will do this quickly because the point is not to draw you into typology, but show like at least the pattern. From what we call amphoroid crater, we have published parallel that's like clearly match with the one from Tir Alba, the cemetery with inverted piriform bodies, painted banded, and entire, it constitutes the most common type at the cemetery. So here we can see clearly like the morphometric conformity between those two, like from those parallel. From some other amphoroid form with globular body, short neck, wide opening, horizontal handle, also knob and bosses. They have some parallels with Cyprogeometric 3, even 4, but slightly different, even 2 and 3, but slightly different, and Cyproarchaic 1 inspiration. And the present is also observed in a tire. And from some of our other amphoroid form, because there are a bunch of them, we don't have exact match, and we can point to suggestive comparanda, but the honest conclusion that there is no one-to-one parallel. And this absence is informative because it pushed toward an adaptation of a typical coastal feature, like those multiple handle, to fill a gap in the repertoire for funerary urn rather than import. Other medium form, like with globular body and high wide neck, sits closer to Tyrian decorative jug tradition, but they mostly occur in southern Philistine sites such as Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Timnah, like globally in this region. We have other crater that really appear in the Ashdod crater tradition of the 8th, 7th century, and as well as for jugs here. That are really common in Ashdod, in Ashkelon, and we have some oddities like those tripod jar with like a tripod leg that and is a non-feature in the Iron Age 2B Levantine context, and also for some urn in Tyre, but this is really without, I didn't clearly find a parallel yet for those. And finally, for the storage jar, we have ovoid and torpedo. Like they fit also like broadly late 8th, 7th century distribution across the southern Levant. And the same for the bowl. It is with a mixed picture. We have some bowl that are really local, like we can find them in Ashdod, Ashkelon, Timnah, and some other that are difficult to understand in terms of parallels, as well as some mushroom lips that really like we will see how they were imitated within the assemblage, some Phoenician type amphoriscos and black and red. So now I shift from what it looked like to what is it made of. So we have one main fabric, which is like the inclusion point toward the littoral environment, with quartz, heavy minerals, microcline, together with a relative scarcity of calcareous rock fragments. And we have another version, which is more calcareous, but not that much. In terms of geological settings, the simplest threading is southern coastal plain production for most of the settlement area. And I have comparative material from neighboring the Nahal around Gaza. And so it matched, but we cannot be clearer than this here. A useful contrast is the presence of Phoenician / Samaria ware, Phoenician ware, and the petrography indicate a production between Tyre and Sidon. In this case, we can ask, like, this takes me to a really definitional problem. Is Ukesh where or like meaning a coherent technological and petrographic package, or is it primarily a surface treatment or a decorative habit applied to multiple local fabric? Here, the mismatch become analytically interesting. For example, applied knobs and bosses are not common in standard Phoenician and local pottery. Also, they do exist, like we found in Ashdod. We have horizontal handle. They are also not typical and constitute more a Cypriot feature with a painted banded that we found also that are parallel in Cyprus, Phoenicia, and Punic context. what is interesting is that in the cemetery like Tyre, the urn does not show like the same slip, burnish, red treatment that we see at Rukesh, despite the similarity of shape. So the most common explanation is not directly importation of this vessel, but local manufacture operating under an external morphological horizon and selecting surface treatment that create a particular visual effect. The combination of ASTI manufacturing, irregular shaping, and surface finishing suggests a production geared to rapid output rather than high investment in finish, which is consistent with a variable standardization. Its presence in the settlement dump, in tomb, and above it implies that this vessel may have been used in short-term domestic activity, ritual fasting, or disposable funerary ceremonies, after which they were discarded. And also the lack of refinement further support the idea that the ceramic were produced with minimal quality control. And this contrasts with some of the urns, which have been described as unsound specimen by Ruta Miran. And these specimens were plausibly imported or maybe not. We don't have access to this ceramic because they were lost or stolen. And in any case, another piece of the puzzle is that some Rukesh ware shapes, especially craters, recall late Philistine decorated ware or Ashdod ware with black and white linear decoration or a thick burnished red slip, mainly from the Iron Age 2A, but with continuity during the Iron Age 2B in the coastal plain. And this vessel apparently reflects also this potentially, but we cannot be sure, the influence of 9th century Phoenician craters. So it's maybe a loop. Phoenician influence LPDW, and LPDW influence like a Syrian shape whatsoever in Rukesh. This is the case exactly like for those craters at El Serra Stratum 7 that were originally classified by Roren as Rukesh ware, but it is likely too early chronologically according to us. So again, no direct inheritance, no direct Phoenician import, more plausibly local ceramic memory intersecting with new external visual language. So this brings us to function. There is no single ceramic form used exclusively as a cinerary urn. The form used are closely linked to a funerary banquet. This we'll see after. And the funerary set is not simply about containment of remain, it's about the orchestration of the sequence, burning, feasting, collecting, depositing, marking, which brings us to the next point. And here we need another methodological guideline. There is no single Phoenician burial site. Cremation associated with Phoenician occur in the Levant roughly between the 10th and the 6th century. And it's practiced in multiple ways: pits, cremation, pyre, secondary deposition in urn, covered and uncovered. So using the well-preserved evidence from Tyre, for example, Obet reconstruct a sequence that is helpful for an interpretive model. The pyre is prepared, it is lit, the living feast where it burns, food remain are kept aside, the pyre is extinguished, then remain placed in urns with additional items. And the sequence matter because it gives functional meanings to vessel sets, transfer, pouring, drinking, and finally urn deposition. So at Rukesh, we have ash lenses near burial consistent with burning bodies together with gift. And we have also here stela that were found also, but not clearly in situ. So the dating is like really careful. So I'm being careful here with this suggestive association, but preservation and documentation impose limits. But we can still offer some hypotheses. And the grave gift often form a standardized set, urns with lids, neck with jug, decanter-like jug, often with like a cup. And the set is best treated as a blanket equipment. It links to wine consumption, and while the food preparation is marginal. And the simplest reconstruction here is when the banquets end, then the cremation process is complete. Ashes were collected and placed into the jar, and often this jar were used during the banquet. So we have remains of earth and vessel above some grave, which point toward this reconstruction. So while Phoenician influence at Rukesh is evident, it does not mean automatically that the site is a Phoenician emporium. We have a coastal position as the intersection of land and maritime routes that can produce heterogeneous communities, local and non-local, without a single controlling identity. So is it something else? It has been linked, and this is our assumption as well, that Rukesh is a cargo of Egypt. And it is a major trading hub along the Egyptian border rather than a Phoenician control center. So in this case, it's neither here nor there. Rukeishwar become especially the caution really become appropriate because morphology does not sit comfortably in the standard Rukesh Phoenician repertoire, and it does not also align straightforwardly with Phoenician tradition either. In this sense, it's neither here nor there, and we can observe instead of convergence of Phoenician, southern coastal plain, and broader Mediterranean input. And in this case, it's really easy to say hybridity, but let's be more all communities of practice. Let us be a bit more concrete before concluding. Imported pottery at Rukesh is present but selective, and most of the vessels are not imports. They reflect local production decision. The morphological language of vessel clearly evokes Phoenician concept, applied plastic element, profile that reference metallic prototype, and a visual ambition to look Phoenician without being technically Phoenician. So imitation here is not a faithful copy, is better described as a derivation and reinterpretation. A potter translates an external idea into local technological syntax. And the result is more of a spectrum with local continuity, external concept, and strategic surface treatment. So the translation is particularly here intelligible in a funerary context. It implies a targeted response to mortuary demands, whereby the potters supplied a Phoenician shape repertoire suitable for a cemetery, with statues and connectivity were already articulated through imported tableware and small vessel, while mostly drawing on regional production from the southern coastal plain. That support the interpretation as a funerary demand epiphenomenon, a micro-scale ritual economy, rather than a broadly exchangeable ware. So I just end with one proposition. Rukeshware is most productive when treated as a problem of production, use, and signaling in port-adjacent community, and not as an ethnic label, and not as a simple proxy for Phoenician political or economical control. And this study is there for a starting point. The next step is to expand the data set of cremation urn assemblages in Israel, and to test whether they are seeing, we are seeing occasional imports or more often locally embedded production that translates Mediterranean and Phoenician looking form into local repertoire. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Leora. This was wonderful. I have would it be possible, or would you think that your petrographic group could be extended also to Ashdod, or would you see big differences between Ashdod and Gaza?
No, we see we don't know Gaza very much. Even when we have a ceramic assemblage from Gaza, they are mostly imports, when they are studied. So basically, I was trying to roam around Gaza to take some soil sample. I even asked her colleague Maddie Butcher because she did so. And we cannot clearly see the difference. I mean, I'm seeing a difference between Ashdod and Ashkelon and Gaza, but it's only visual. The matrix is less silty somehow, which is quite weird. And there is less rounded quartz. They're much more microcline, like feldspar. But we need more research. I mean, it looks like southern coastal plain. This is what I can.
So here is a follow-up question. Is there any chance that there is still access to some of the mud bricks? Because of course, unlike pottery that can move mud bricks with big installations or big structures are
so yes, but no. A while ago, I talked to Jean-Baptiste Humbert about Balachia and asked about material, you know, like a very innocent question, and it was an absolute no. So no Gaza mud brick for me, no Gaza pottery for me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just to add a few things to Leora, since I'm on this talk too. First of all, this could not happen without Eliezer Oren's excavations there, of course, and he's willing eventually to give us this material. So it was, you know, those who know, it was not so easy, but eventually we now perhaps we will be able to publish his excavation there, including all this technological analysis and also neutron activation analysis. And I just want to add something interesting to Leora's, I think, excellent presentation, is that very, very recently we have received the results of neutron activation analysis for Rukesh Cypriot wares from exactly the same context. And what is the most interesting, in our opinion, is that all the black on red pottery from Cypriot black on red from Rukesh, all of it comes from the area of Paleopathos Kuklia, Amathos, from western, southwestern part of Cyprus. And we do not see this pattern in black on red pottery, Cypriot pottery in the more northern parts of the country. So this brings into attention, of course, the Phoenician cremation cemetery in Amathus, which was discovered a few years ago. So perhaps one can hypothesize, I think, with a high degree of certainty, an existence of a maritime route that connected the area of Paleopathos directly to area of Gaza, Rukesh. And this is, of course, that means that we are not talking about coastal navigation, but these people, they knew how to traverse deep waters without any doubt. So this is something to add to this peculiar Rukesh ware, as
And
we still call it.
we like some of the ceramic, the urn are actually like we found a lot of parallel from Paleopathos, like from the cemetery.
cool.
So it's pointing toward this direction.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was very interesting talk. Probably as you know, I dug at Deir el-Balach and I did extensive petrographic analysis of the pottery and the mud brick. I think I also did mud bricks there, which has all been published.
Yeah,
So
the
you might,
picture, like between picture, it's better when you can see it. Like
Pardon?
it's better when you can see it like under the microscope.
well, I do. I probably still have my
Yeah.
petrographic slides
Okay.
in my collection. So petrographic slides are probably even better than
Okay.
looking under the microscope. So I just wanted to let you know that there is local material that you can, that was quarried from the site itself.
Okay.
Which is very
Okay, so basically it's like also fitting the alluvial quartzic. Okay.
So thank you. It was an excellent presentation and fantastic work. And I'm losing my voice, so sorry. So with all the evidence you presented, why are we referring to Rukesh ware as Phoenician? Why can't we call it, if we're going to give it a territorial or an ethnic term, why don't we call it Philistine?
Because it's not only Philistine, it's not only Phoenician, it's a blend.
Well, it is a blend, but it's a site right on the coast. So as Alex said, the Cypriot pottery is coming by ship from Cyprus.
Mhm.
And I don't know where the other pottery is coming from. Maybe there's a local, Bedouin tradition or something like that. This is all I know about Rukesh, except what Amiran published. But I would seriously rethink any kind of connection except a trade connection with the Phoenicians. We know nothing about Philistine burials except the ones at Ashkelon, and calling those Philistine
And
is a little bit iffy as well. So
in Ashkelon, it was like, it's a clearly a Philistine site. We cannot like dismiss this fact.
proximity to, I know,
And
I
but
worked at Ashkelon.
even Daniel Master wrote in this article, in his article, that there is some Phoenician characteristic to the assemblage. Doesn't mean it's Phoenician. It is clearly not. In our case, we have a Phoenician shape, finishing like treatment, even some that like apply characteristic decoration with cremation burials. And we know that cremation burial is not only like a Phoenician characteristic, but in any case, I didn't say like it was a Phoenician ware. It's a blend of like an hybrid that was, and this type of hybrid are observed like through the Mediterranean during the 8th and 7th century. We have it in Greece, we have it in Cyprus, we have it in Spain, like this type of hybrid pottery that are actually mixing some Phoenician characteristic with local shape, but also manufacturing techniques. So it's not impossible. It's a very common actually configuration, and it is exactly the case with Rukesh ware.
Right, and I would just respond to that by saying most of the parallels, at least for the typology that you presented, is late Philistine ware, which is local. The petrography showed that is regionally local. So why don't we refer to this as a local tradition?
It is a local tradition. It is
There.
Rukesh tradition, an epiphenomenon inspired maybe by Phoenician, and not maybe, because you have clearly Phoenician shape that are replicated and does not appear elsewhere outside of the site. So
A little bit interesting talk, but we have to go to the next lecture by Aaron Brody from the Pacific School of Religion. And he will talk about women's religion, culture, and the sea, underwater evidence from the Phoenician homeland. Aaron.
I'll try and be a riveting speaker, keep you all awake. No, that's fine. That's good. Okay, we all set? Lights, camera, action. Nachon? No? Mitchil or lo? Okay. Okay. Recent research into the underwater finds from locations off of the northern coast of Israel and the southern coast of Lebanon has defined these maritime assemblages as ritual deposits. Hundreds of ceramic figurines were discovered submerged beneath the waters of the Mediterranean at both Shavet Zion, a locus located between the more prominent urban settlements of Akko and Aksiv, and a location northwest of Tyre. Boop. It's not booping. Sorry, folks. She has magic hands, magic fingers. That's a North American joke. Geographically and culturally, these sites fall within the regions of Phoenicia in the late Iron Age, Persian, and early Hellenistic periods. Despite early interpretations of both sites as the remnant of shipwrecks, no wooden hull remains or other varieties of ubiquitous cargo were discovered at either site. Date ranges of finds from either location, the 7th to 3rd centuries BCE at Shavet Zion and 6th to 4th centuries BCE at Tyre, indicate gradual deposition of artifacts over extended periods of time rather than wreck incidents at either site. Yofi. Differences between the Shavet Zion and Tyre deposits remain in terms of the gender of the figurines found at each location. The approximately 250 to 300 figurines of several types from Chavet-Sion are all female. The underwater core plastic finds from nearby Tyre, numbering over 300, are dominated by female figurines, but a few male statuettes are present as well. I propose that these gendered differences from either underwater locus represent variations in ritual performances that took place at either site. While it is not possible to fully equate female figurines with the ritual use of these artifacts solely by women or male figurines by men, it is evident that the status of the female figurines, many of which are depicted as pregnant or holding a baby, represents aspects of women's day-to-day and ritual concerns involving the prenatal stage, perinatal phase, and time of care for very young children. These figurines portray uniquely female traits. While it is likely that the women's rituals were conducted at both sites, Chavet-Sion is distinct in that it was solely a locale associated with women's religious culture and rites, conducted at sea. To quote Carol Meyer's definition of women's religious culture, and I'm going to take some water because my voice is going. To quote Carol Meyers, women's religious practices can be seen as strategies akin to preventative and restorative medical procedures of the modern world, to intervene with the divine forces believed to impact the well-being of mother and child, and to influence them in order to assure their benevolent and protective presence to avert their destructive powers. Somebody give that gentleman a throat lozenge. The rituals surrounding pregnancy, labor, and birth, this is still Carol Meyers, not me, along with those securing fertility before pregnancy and those dealing with the postpartum lactation, infant care, and circumcision, constitute the religious culture of women more than men. Not a shocking statement, but especially for those of you who've given birth. General studies of Phoenician culture have blossomed in recent years, not novel for many of you authors in this audience. Since Glenn Marco's book was published in the early 2000s, there are a score of new volumes of individuals and multiple authors in various research languages, again, some of whom are sitting in this audience, I believe. Yet there has been very little attention in these more synthetic treatments to topics related to Phoenician women or gender performance. These more focused studies are found in a handful of articles in specialized journals, many published in Spanish and focused on the Western Mediterranean. They were also the topic of a conference in Tübingen and have been delivered at professional meetings or in online talk series sponsored under my purview, hosted by the Bade Museum and Archaeological Research Facility at UC Berkeley in 2023 and 24, the publication of which is forthcoming in the Journal of Eastern Mediterranean Archaeology and Heritage Studies, thanks to Ann Killebrew, and also thanks goes out to my co-editor of that future volume, Helen Dixon. Thus, the topic is still in its infancy, despite the fact that there are decent data sets in terms of material culture, representational data, textual data, and epigraphic evidence as well. So what is in the name? One should also be aware of recent challenges to the use of the term Phoenician, as we've heard throughout this day, as a cultural descriptor to preface the presentation of materials found at sites in the homeland along the Levantine littoral or in various locations of colony sites throughout the Mediterranean and Atlantic coast of Iberia and Morocco. I'm retaining the use of Phoenician as an edict descriptor used in classical texts to differentiate peoples from the Levant their daughter colonies in the first millennium BCE, which has come into modern usage in a somewhat uncritical fashion, borrowed from ancient classical writings. Recent reconsiderations have deemed Phoenician and its Latin derivative Punic as an appropriate appellation for groups that shared variations of a Northwest Semitic language, material culture, religious concepts and practices, and economic networks, despite the drawbacks of this terminology, utilized by outsider Greek-speaking groups with all of their inherent ancient biases. The underwater finds from off of the coast near Tyre and Shavet Zion are unique, despite the ubiquitous nature of the location of Phoenician settlements along coastal littorals and islands from the homeland to the Eastern Mediterranean to outside the Straits of Gibraltar. Some comparisons can be drawn to the finds of offerings from underwater at locations around the island of Gader, now Cadiz, and forgive my Spanish pronunciation to the natives in the audience, in southwestern Spain, and to votive metal hoards uncovered at various loci under the Bay of Cadiz. These far western discoveries, however, do not represent the same sort of concentration of ceramic figurines as the ones in the East, and have been explained by their proximity to coastal temples, that's for Cadiz, or related to ritual concerns after earthquakes and resulting tsunamis. In comparison, the Levantine find spots are not related to any known terrestrial temples and are generally interpreted as marine loci for offerings from rituals performed in fulfillment of vows related to aspects of everyday concerns. I'll try and hurry up. I know people are getting sleepy. The terracotta figurines found underwater near Tyre were scattered along the seafloor more than 4 kilometers northwest of the settlement. The area was previously looted, and numerous barnacle-encrusted figurines have appeared on the international antiquities market. Despite these disturbances, over 300 figurines were discovered scattered across the sandy and rocky seafloor during several seasons of excavations in the early 2000s. While statistics are not provided breaking down these 300 plus figurines numerically, the excavator divides the group into 3 main types. The majority of these statuettes are female, either pregnant or nursing a young child. There are 2 male figurine types, one in an attitude of prayer or benediction, and the other rendered in an archaic style. None of the female figurines have any symbols associated with them. This is for the ones from near Tyre. One of the male figurines was inscribed Eshmun Yaten, which is a prayer to the Phoenician healing god Eshmun, presumably fulfilled in part of the deposit, in part by the deposit of that votive. Many of the female figurines have a miniature bowl-like feature at the feet of the figure that is part of the statuette. These features may have served as a place to light incense as part of the ritual performed before depositing the figurine in the sea. While the gender of the figurines discovered underwater near Tyre is mixed, it is important to note that the excavator's interpretation that the group is focused on female statuettes, especially ones that are represented as pregnant or nursing. So again, we lack the statistics. So how many out of 300? I can't pinpoint, but I think it's the vast majority. This prominence of female votive offerings, ritually deposited in a specific location at sea, portraying women in a state of pregnancy or the care and feeding of young children, is also found 30 kilometers to the south, underwater, less than a kilometer offshore, at a site called Shavet Zion. The underwater finds discovered near Shavet Zion on the northern coast of Israel present interesting parallels and differences with the immersed figurines from Tyre. The location of Shavet Zion is not near any contemporary ancient settlement. Instead, the site is about equidistant from the important contemporary Phoenician cities of Akziv, approximately 9 kilometers to its north, and Akko, around 8 kilometers to its south. Right, Anne? While the artifacts submerged near Tyre were found 4.5 kilometers northwest of the ancient city, the Shavet Zion figurines were concentrated less than 1 kilometer offshore. The white cliffs that descend directly into the Mediterranean at Rosh Hanikah are visible from out at sea off of Shavet Zion, and the figurines were offered to the waters just to the northwest of the outlet of a seasonal river, the Nahal Bet HaEmek. At the juncture of this river with the sea, a Byzantine church has been excavated, possibly marking the site of an earlier seaside shrine, covered or obliterated by later monumental building activities. Both the Tyre and Shavet Zion deposits were found on a similar type of seabed, consisting primarily of a sandy bottom and intermittent reef rock. In terms of the finds themselves, each concentration of figurines was accompanied by ceramic utilitarian wares, primarily fragments of storage jars. The gender represented of the Shavet Zion figurines, however, varies from the Tyre assemblage, as it is 100% female. Girl power. Between 250 to 300 female figurines were uncovered at the site, with no male or other gendered statuettes discovered at Shavet Zion. These numbers may change with the ongoing research of Edri, Ehrlich, and Yasser Landau, now focused on the figurines in particular, after having published a study in IJNA on the accompanying ceramics. Todarba, excellent article. From a gender perspective, the fact that all of the figurines from Shavet Zion are women is of note and is not replicated among caches of contemporary figurines found in sacred favisse on land sites, nor underwater near Tyre. Thus, I posit that the ritual actions taking place offshore near Shavet Zion were solely related to Phoenician women's religious culture. This gendered inference is further reinforced by the symbolism of many of the figurines and by symbols found on the statuettes themselves. Some of the Shavet Zion figurines are depicted as pregnant, others hold babies. Many are molded with hand gestures that suggest a pose of blessing. This symbolism suggests rituals involved with the fulfillment of vows related to desires for pregnancy, the success of a pregnancy, or perhaps purification after an unsuccessful pregnancy, or care for or purification of a mother after giving birth, and sanctification of her care for her young child and the child itself. The symbols found on a few of the female figurines provide further insight into the intersections of both the divine and profane feminine at Shavet Zion, as the sign of Tanit and the dolphin are depicted on several statuettes, and you can see the details on these slides. The symbol called the sign of Tanit in Phoenician studies is an emblem consisting of a triangle surmounted by a straight line and a circle at its peak, and numerous variations to this basic design. And where's Sam Wolf, the real expert? So he's right in the audience. Interpretations of who or what this symbol represents vary widely, but as its modern nomenclature indicates, the sign has traditionally been associated with the Phoenician goddess Tanit. The goddess Tanit, likely pronounced Tinit or something like that, in antiquity, was the mother of the Carthaginian pantheon of gods and goddesses. Partnered with the chief god of Carthage, Balhamon, Tanit was associated with numerous attributes similar to her classical counterparts, the goddesses Hera and Juno. Tanit was the goddess par excellence of agricultural fecundity and human fertility. Protectress, that's hard, of mothers, pregnancy, childbirth, and young children. Better drink some water. Tanit, however, was also associated with the ritual dedication or sacrifice of newborns and young children, together with her consort Baal Hamon. These ritual dedications took place in specialized sacrificial burial grounds at Carthage, and I'm sure Brian Garnon will tell us some more about this, and nearby sites in the Western Mediterranean, often called Tophets in scholarly studies. In Western Phoenician sites, the goddess Tanit also has maritime attributes that include her companion animal, the dolphin, and she is associated with the protection of seafarers, ships, and proper navigation. See Brody, 1998. Thus, it is not surprising that besides the symbol of the sign of Tanit, a representation of a dolphin is also present on one of the Shavet Zion figurines. Following recent studies of Phoenician figurines by Barbara Bolognani and other scholars, it is unlikely that these female figurines represent a deity. Is this the case? In this case, the goddess Tanit. Rather, a preferred interpretation is that the female figurines that include the sign of Tanit represent female worshippers of, dedicants to, the goddess Tanit. See, she's sending us a sign. One particular well-preserved figurine is very telling. Can you take that outside, please? It depicts a fully robed female with her left arm raised across her chest, with the hand clutched just beneath the chin. Her right hand is raised vertically with the palm, on her belly, the sign of Tanit prominently depicted, likely representing a pendant worn around the neck of the adherent. The intersection of a locus of women's religious culture, worshippers of the sign of Tanit, the goddess Tanit, and the sea is tantalizing. Another important symbol of the Phoenician mother goddess Tanit, not present from the finds at Shavet Zion, but critical for Phoenician seafarers, was the crescent and disk, or the new moon. For mariners, the new moon symbol of the goddess Tanit represented her protection over proper navigation and wayfinding over the seas. Could the new moon and its cycles have also had a special connection with the maritime location of Shavet Zion as sacred space related to the goddess Tanit, or symbolize the correct lunar time to propitiate the deity with ceremonies at sea and rituals fulfilled by the dedication of female figurines in the waters of the Mediterranean? Another possible interpretation of the Shavet Zion deposits comes from a comparison with ritual practices in the classical world. Eris Williams Reed has recently presented the importance of the sea as a locus of purification for Greek women in relations to religious rituals involving shameful pregnancies. Reed notes in her 2018 Durham University dissertation, the Eno myths sits within a broader category of myth themes about women who, usually in association with the shameful pregnancy, either jump or are pushed into the sea. Often the women and their children are saved by divine intervention and or undergo a life-saving transformation. In particular, the sea is an appropriate place to cast out fallen women, quote unquote, because it is a place of no return. Its waters cleanse the pollution of the illegitimate and transgressive acts, and conceptually, it functions as a liminal space that facilitates transitions between the life stages. Immersions into the sea are clearly an essential component of this myth, unquote. Unfortunately, we lack a great deal of Phoenician literature And most of what we have preserved is found translated, transformed, and embedded in classical and Tanakh texts. So we have no direct written information regarding Phoenician views about the sea or Phoenician women's interactions with or thoughts about the marine environment. Could the waters around Shavet Zion have been imbued with cleansing properties as an important aspect of women's religious culture that took place at the location? Could this maritime liminal space between the shore and the deep, within sight of the fresh waters of a river outlet and the white cliffs of Rosh Hashanah, have helped women's transitions from barren to pregnant, pregnancy to motherhood, or breastfeeding to parturition? May the goddess Tanit have protected Phoenician women's engagement with the sea in these rites of passage, or were these dedications in thanks to the goddess? Propitiations that were fulfilled by jettisoning statuettes to the bottom of the Mediterranean in proscribed locations. Given the isolated nature of the Shavet Zion finds, kilometers away from the settlements of Ziv and Akko, I propose that the locus was a maritime pilgrimage site. As part of the ceremonies performed at the spot, people must have traveled by boat in order to finalize their vows, with rituals that ended with depositing the figurines and ceramics involved in the ceremonies under the waters of the Mediterranean. That's my last slide. At least some, if not the majority of these dedicants must have been women, likely transitioning from barren to pregnant or from pregnancy to motherhood, or asking the goddess Tanit for protection during the vulnerable stages of pregnancy, the birthing process, or breastfeeding young children. The sea and its associations with the goddess Tanit was a liminal place appropriate for cleansing impurities and aiding in a variety of transitions. Like many Phoenician religious beliefs and ritual practices, these maritime aspects of women's religious culture were limited to specific locations, in these instances off of the coast of Tyre and Shavet Zion. While the rituals performed on the waters near Tyre were more varied from a gendered perspective, those enacted near Shavet Zion can be interpreted as specialized maritime aspects of the religious culture of Phoenician women. These ceremonies at sea took place in relation to the divine feminine, in particular the goddess Tanit, and were rituals that sought sacred protection during critical and vulnerable aspects of the reproduction and futures of Phoenician households and women's religious culture. That is, pregnancy, the perinatal phase, and the postpartum care of babies and young children. Thank you. I have to put on my glasses so I can see the order. In Shalot.
Thank you for bringing up women in sea. And I would ask, would you
Bevakasha.
see these rituals as an opportunity for women to be at sea, possibly in small boats for specific purposes? Or would you envision women having been allowed on bigger cargo transport ships?
You know, as just like putting a name to ceramics, gendering a voyage is challenging. From obviously more modern parallels, it's pretty clear that most other maritime societies, it's men who are doing the sailing or men who are doing the rowing. So essentially behind this proposal is that the ship, no matter what size, was being crewed by men, being steered by men, but perhaps women were on board finalizing these rituals. Because of course we know from, just in general, ancient Near East, not just, Phoenician or Israelite or whatever, that the religious systems that these cultures had, if you made a vow, you had to complete it because otherwise you'd piss off the god or goddess. And then we all know from Greek texts, you don't want to do that, right? So
can I challenge you?
yeah.
If this is the case, and of course I agree, would it be possible that these figurines are the representatives of women fantasy by men to do the ritual instead of actually allowing women to be on the boat?
Sure. There are many possibilities, as you know, with interpretive levels of things. So Bevadai Sheken. I mean, of course. Yeah. I mean, again, but I mean, you could also propose that, you know, dogs had them in their mouth and they were brought on board and dropped them off. You know, we can, so I'm using Occam's razor. It's sort of the most simple answer is usually the best answer, but I appreciate the pushback. Thank you. Yeah.
I want to thank all of the presenters in this session and today, and for the organizers, sorry, for organizing this interesting day. Alex has a short invitation.
Thank you. Thank you all for this productive day. Very long, I have to admit, but still, nevertheless, that was the idea. So now we invite you for a reception at the lobby in celebration of a new publication in the language of Canaan, Select Phoenician Inscriptions, with the Hebrew translation by Shmuel Achituv and the grammar by Daniel Sivan. So everybody invited for this reception. Thank you and see you tomorrow.
Yeah.